this chapter, and is the analogy between the individual psyche, and there seemed to be a correlation between the basic assumptions and unconscious processes, and then a correlation between the work group and the ego. And so I'm wondering how complete that analogy is, or how helpful it is to help us think about this. Okay.
Which Judy mentioned anxiety. Blondeau was describing that the kind of anxiety differs depending on which of the dependency group or the fight-flight group or the uniting pairing group is, but that anxiety is translated differently depending on that. But I pointed to what Jay said about the unconscious, how these basic assumptions are kind of underneath the purpose of the work group, which is where everyone's in agreement to a goal, and then the basic assumptions is what's operating underneath to subvert the goal.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now,
in every group.
Yes.
Yeah. It's sort of like a group version of neurosis. This is the feeling.
Or psychosis.
Or psychosis.
Or
yeah.
psychosis.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, that's terribly important then, right? It adds to what Judy was saying, that is, that the basic assumptions operate in silence in a group, and the group members are not aware that they are operating under a basic assumption. The basic assumption, by definition, is not conscious and not spoken about. Right? It operates on the basis of valencies, and Blandoni rightly says that Bion takes valency from chemistry. Valencies are the different elements that have valencies that make them available to combine with another that has the same valency to form a compound, right? Let's say chloride can combine with natrium, right, on the basis of the valency, so that, let's say, 2 atoms of natrium can combine with 1 atom of chloride, which has twice as many valencies as natrium, and they just combine, but they combine just by these attractions of valencies, not by any thought processes, right? So Bion assumes, and this is part of his theory on groups and basic assumptions, that human beings have a mindset of a herd animal, right, that makes them available to combine with others in groups, at which point the herd mentality of each individual starts to operate and to become apparent to an observer that is willing to observe what happens in groups, but not that when a group meets there is anything new happening, but rather that something that was occult, that was mute before in the individual mind, starts arising in an unspoken and unconscious way. This is the basis, or rather I would say, according to Bion, it is the basis of what in psychoanalysis is transference. That is, when we say that a patient in the analytic setting with an analyst starts to experience particular emotions or anxieties or desires, this is nothing new that is happening in the patient, but it takes the analytic setting and the two people meeting in a particular frame and in a particular context for that to arise and to become observable to the observer who knows how to observe that. But so much so that when the individual analyst points out to the patient that this and this he, the analyst, can observe, the patient is the first one to be terribly surprised because he didn't notice it. Now the same happens in groups. The basic assumptions operate in a totally mute and unnoticed way, and Bion did that, would point out what is happening in the group, that stirred something up in the group. And that was stirred up, some anxieties were stirred up in the group when they were called by Bion to observe what was happening with the individuals in the group. Look what is happening, right? He would sit, for instance, with the injured soldiers who were sent back from the front to be rehabilitated as quickly as possible, to be sent back, right, to be deployed back to the front. And he would sit there and would point out to them, everybody looking at him and expecting him to give them some exercises or whatever, and him say, you seem to think that I should know what we have to do. And they thought that he was mocking them or teasing them, and they started to get very anxious and then tried to shut him up, treating him as if he were crazy or ignoring him, and then deciding among them who would take over to make something happen, being that Bion decided that he would not make anything happen other than sit there and observe, right? But this, we know, happens in an individual analysis too. When a patient, a naive patient comes, if there still exist only naive patients, come and expect that the analyst will tell them what they have to do, and the analyst does not tell them what they have to do, is just observing what they are doing rather than telling them what they have to do, right? Now that is the level of the basic assumptions. When we realized that people were looking at him and expecting him to do something or to tell them what they would have to do, Bion observed that what was operating there, that everybody was in agreement that Bion was the one who would tell them, was a basic assumption of dependence, right? And that the basic assumption of dependence kept operating underneath the proposal to work among everybody on finding a task first, right, together, and not Bion setting the task. That would be an example of a dependence group, right? And that is one of the basic assumptions. A prototype of a dependence group is the group of two or of three formed by the baby and the mother, or the baby and the parents, right? Where the baby is depending on the breast to survive, or on the parents to take care of him, raise him, and make things safe. But what Bion says is that there is a mentality in all of us, hardwired, that doesn't go away just because we stop being babies. It continues. But that's not the only one. Right? And it's not conscious. And in a group it just happens, and as you said, it interferes or may interfere and take over the aim of a work group to work on something. Right? Be it a study group, a military group, a rehabilitation group, a business group, whichever. It's also in opposition to thinking, and I think one of you said that the work group had to do with thinking. I think it was you, right? It's an opposition of thinking, because if the group can depend on someone who does the thinking, everybody else can just sit there passive and expect someone to do the work of thinking and to take the responsibility for the destiny of the group.
So that would be an example, another form of a dependency group, right?
Yes,
Waiting on somebody else to do the thinking.
exactly. Right? And what I'm indicating here is terribly important, that the basic assumption group, whichever, we'll talk of the other two in a minute, are in opposition to the work group for as long as the work group implies thinking, and implies not the thinking of one in the name of everybody else, but the thinking and developing more thinking among all the members of the group to promote growth. Growth of what? Growth of thinking.
So the work group is different than the basic assumption group. However, there are basic assumptions that underlie the work group.
All the time. This is Bion's actually strong hypothesis, that the basic assumptions are in the nature of the human being. Right? It's not a good or a bad thing. You have no choice. It's there. If the work group is in the moment operating under the aegis of work, then the basic assumptions lie in the background. They withdraw to the background, but they don't resolve. They never resolve. They're always there. It's like your consciousness and your unconscious. Your unconscious never goes away. By definition, it's part of the anatomy of the mind. You have a conscious, a preconscious, and an unconscious. It won't go away. And it's not a problem that it doesn't go away. It shouldn't go away. But here and there, it may interfere, right? If you become neurotic or psychotic or obsessive compulsive or whatever, it will interfere with your conscious task, because now you are, let's say, interfered by having obsessive rituals which do not allow you to study or to go to work or to have a social relation to anyone, because you're busy with something else that you don't know where it comes from, but it keeps you busy.
Well, you say it doesn't go away, but is it not changed when it's made conscious? Just like if you, the leader of a group, were to point out something that it just was a basic assumption that had come up, or in individual therapy, isn't that what part of that is, when something's unconscious is made aware that changes it, so it doesn't go away, but it's changed.
Well,
Is it for the person or for the group?
In what way?
Well, they would be more aware of what's going on underneath,
All right.
and that may change maybe the behavior, the function of the group to reach the work group purpose better.
Forever or momentarily?
Well, what if in the work group, where the three basic assumptions are in the background, maybe that's a group where all the participants are thinking about what they're learning or what they're hearing, and they're not relying on just one person to spill it all out for them and tell them what to think or what direction to go in. So that those things are more in the background, and each person may feel more able to think for themselves and to evaluate for themselves.
Yes, that's right.
And
Yes.
if it's a basic assumption group, then they're looking for the one person to fill them up or to guide them.
Right, too, yes.
I think maybe related to that point, I find myself having a thought about thinking.
Can you hear, Judy?
Yes, I'm fine.
Good.
It's better, much better now.
I mean, using that example of one person in a group, for example, primarily you here tonight, it would seem that there is an assumption that one person will teach more, guide more, say more, know more. And if that person is relatively articulate or verbal in comparison to a quieter norm elsewhere, does that indicate is that an indication of, or can that be a comment on thought?